Rising begins in the fall because it is in the moments when life knocks us down that the real work of transformation begins, and though it often feels like the end, every setback carries within it the hidden seed of growth waiting for the right conditions to bloom. When we stumble, fail, or face rejection, it is easy to believe that we are broken beyond repair, yet the truth is that falling cracks us open in ways success never could, exposing the places where we have been hiding our fears, our doubts, and our vulnerabilities, and while we may try to avoid the discomfort of that exposure, it is exactly what creates the space for courage to emerge, because no one learns strength by standing tall without challenge, but rather by being brought to their knees and finding the will to rise again. In those quiet, painful pauses when the world feels heavy and the future uncertain, the soil of our spirit is being prepared, and what feels like loss or failure is often the planting ground for resilience, for the ability to adapt, to bend, and to grow deeper roots that storms cannot easily shake. Rising is not about avoiding the fall, but about allowing the fall to teach us, to strip away illusions, to remind us of what truly matters, and to reveal strengths we would have never known had everything gone smoothly. Every scar becomes a marker of survival, every tear waters the ground where hope will grow, and every time we feel like we have lost everything, what is actually being given is a new chance to rebuild on sturdier foundations. It is only after we have been humbled by the weight of disappointment that we understand the power of gratitude for small victories. It is only after we have been emptied by loss that we can appreciate the fullness of connection, and it is only after the silence of defeat that we can hear the voice inside us urging us forward. Falling is not proof of weakness, but proof of living, for only those who dare to try, to risk, to dream, and to step outside their comfort are given the chance to fall. And though that moment hurts, it is also the invitation to rise stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. Just as seasons remind us that winter is not forever, but the necessary rest before spring, so too does every fall remind us that life is not over but being reshaped, preparing us for a version of ourselves that could not exist. Without the breaking, we discover that resilience is not about denying the pain or pretending it doesn't hurt, but about allowing the pain to become part of the story without letting it define the ending, and in doing so we cultivate a quiet confidence that even if we are knocked down again, we have within us the power to rise, not in spite of the fall, but because of it, and that truth changes everything. For once you realize that falling is not failure, but the birthplace of your strength, you begin to see every setback not as a wall, but as a doorway, not as punishment, but as preparation. And one day you look back at what you thought would destroy you and realize it was actually the beginning of your rise. Courage is born in vulnerability because true strength does not come from pretending to be unbreakable, but from daring to stand in the rawness of our fears, our doubts, and our imperfections, and admitting them without disguise. For it is only when we face ourselves honestly that we can rise above the stories that keep us small. Many of us are taught that courage means fearlessness, yet real courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward while shaking, trembling, and uncertain, and that kind of bravery is possible only when we allow vulnerability to open the door. Because vulnerability strips away the armor we use to protect ourselves and reveals the heart that beats underneath, the part of us that longs to be seen and longs to live fully. To rise means to step into the unknown without the guarantee of success, to take risks knowing rejection is possible, to share our truth even when it may not be received the way we hope. And all of this requires us to walk straight into the discomfort we would rather avoid. Yet it is in that very place of discomfort that we discover our courage. Vulnerability is not weakness, but the most accurate measure of strength. Because it takes far more bravery to say, "I am afraid, but I will try," than it does to hide behind silence and avoidance. And every time we allow ourselves to be seen as we are strengthening the muscle of resilience that makes rising possible. Fear loses its grip when we stop running from it and instead turn toward it with honesty, acknowledging that it exists but refusing to let it control us. And in that shift, we begin to understand that courage is not about never falling, but about choosing to rise even with knees still bruised and a heart still tender. We rise when we dare to apply for opportunities we think are beyond us, when we speak words of truth that shake in our throat, when we admit that we need help instead of pretending we have it all figured out, and when we allow someone else to see the tears we tried so hard to hide, because in those moments we are teaching ourselves that being human is not something to be ashamed of, but the very reason we are capable of connection, growth, and transformation. Vulnerability is the birthplace of every bold act because it strips life down to what matters most, the willingness to show up and be seen. And while the world may tell us to put on masks and armor, real rising comes from setting them aside, letting the world see the truth of our humanity, and discovering that even in the exposure we are not destroyed but freed. Courage begins in those small moments of honesty, when we confess that we are afraid, when we admit that we care, when we risk hearing no, but show up anyway. And over time, those small acts build into a life of resilience and boldness, proving that what we once thought would break us actually shaped us into someone unshakable, not because we became perfect, but because we chose to rise exactly as we are. Shame cannot survive empathy because shame thrives in silence, secrecy, and judgment, and the moment we allow ourselves to be seen in our struggles by another human being who responds with compassion rather than criticism, its power begins to dissolve, for shame whispers that we are unworthy, that we are alone in our brokenness, and that if anyone knew the truth about us, we would no longer be loved. Yet empathy steps in and says, I see you, I hear you, and you are not alone. And in that simple exchange, healing begins to take root. Hiding keeps us trapped, locked in the walls of our own self-doubt, replaying mistakes and failures as evidence that we are not enough. But when we risk opening up, when we allow someone else to hear the story we thought we could never tell, we discover that connection is not lost but deepened, because people do not bond over perfection. They bond over the courage to be real, and in that shared humanity shame cannot breathe. Healing does not come from denying our pain, but from facing it, naming it, and then placing it in the light of empathy where it is met with understanding, for empathy does not try to fix or minimize. It simply stands beside us in the mess and says, "Me too." And that presence alone is enough to weaken the grip of shame. To rise means to allow ourselves to be known, to step out of hiding even when it feels terrifying, because the very act of connection proves that our greatest fear, that we are unlovable, is a lie, and as that lie crumbles, space opens for healing, for self-compassion, and for growth. Shame isolates, but empathy gathers, reminding us that our worth is not determined by the mistakes we've made or the wounds we carry, but by the simple fact of being human. And when others reflect that truth back to us, we begin to see ourselves differently, with softer eyes and a kinder heart. The chains of shame fall apart when they are touched by empathy, because shame cannot survive exposure without judgment. And every time we share our story and are met with understanding rather than rejection, shame loses another layer of its hold. To stop hiding is to reclaim our voice, to step into the truth of our experience without apology, and to allow connection to remind us that healing is not a solitary act but a shared journey, one where the light of another's compassion helps guide us out of our own darkness. Empathy does not erase the past, but it reframes it, showing us that even our most painful chapters do not define us. They connect us, and in that connection lies freedom, because when we realize we are not alone in our struggles, the shame that once silenced us becomes the story that gives others courage to speak, and the healing that begins within us ripples outward, turning what once felt like weakness into a bridge of strength. Resilience is practiced, not possessed, because it is not a fixed trait that some people are born with while others are left without, but a quality that is built through the daily choices we make in the face of struggle, uncertainty, and pain. And every time we decide to keep going when it would be easier to quit, we are strengthening that inner muscle. Resilience does not arrive in a single dramatic moment, but in the quiet persistence of showing up again and again, even when progress feels invisible, and it is often cultivated in the ordinary days when we fight battles no one else sees. When we choose patience in the middle of frustration, when we take one more step even though the path feels endless, and when we refuse to let setbacks define the end of our story, strength grows not from avoiding difficulty, but from walking through it, from stumbling, from falling, and from learning to stand again. And with each return, we remind ourselves that we are capable of enduring more than we once believed. Resilience is practiced in the way we breathe through disappointment, in the way we adapt when plans fall apart, in the way we gather courage to try again after failure, and in the way we allow hope to flicker even when everything around us feels dark. It is not a possession we carry in our pocket, but a skill we sharpen every time we face fear, grief, or rejection and choose to keep moving forward. And that repetition becomes the foundation of unshakable strength. Resilience teaches us that survival is not about perfection or speed, but about persistence, about holding on through the storm until the calm returns, about trusting that the pain of today can become the wisdom of tomorrow, and about understanding that progress often happens in the smallest steps, the ones that seem insignificant until they add up to transformation. Every scar on our heart is a record of resilience, proof that we endured, that we faced nights we thought would never end and still greeted the morning. And those experiences remind us that strength is not born from comfort, but from struggle, not from ease, but from endurance, and not from certainty, but from the courage to live with uncertainty. Resilience is not a destination we reach, but a way of living, a practice of meeting life as it comes, bending without breaking, learning without losing ourselves, and choosing to rise every time we fall. And the more we practice it, the more we come to trust in our own ability to face what lies ahead. For resilience does not promise that life will be free of hardship, but it does promise that hardship will not break us, and in knowing that, we find the strength to keep going even on the hardest days. Your story is your power because the very experiences that once brought you to your knees, the heartbreaks, the losses, the failures, and the moments you thought would be the end of you, often become the source of light that helps someone else find their way out of darkness. And while it is tempting to bury the chapters we wish had never happened, it is in those raw, imperfect pages that the deepest truth lies, the truth that whispers to another human being, "You are not alone, and if I survived this, you can too." What once broke you becomes the reason someone else dares to rise. Because your scars, far from being signs of weakness, are proof that healing is possible. And when you speak from that place of lived pain and resilience, your voice carries an authenticity that no polished facade could ever hold. People are not moved by perfection. They are moved by honesty, by the trembling voice that admits it was afraid but kept going, by the story that confesses the nights of despair yet still points toward hope, and by the courage it takes to say, "This hurt me, but it did not end me." The wounds you carry are not evidence of defeat, but evidence of survival, and when you choose to share them, you transform them into lifelines for others who may be drowning in the same waters you once fought through. Every trial you endured, every fall you rose from, every tear you thought no one saw becomes part of a larger narrative that someone else desperately needs to hear. Because in your story they find the proof that they too can endure, that brokenness is not final, and that rising is not reserved for the unscarred. Your story becomes a map, guiding others through terrain you have already walked, reminding them that while the journey is hard, it is not impossible, and though it can feel vulnerable, even terrifying, to let others see the parts of you that once ached the most, that very vulnerability is what makes your story powerful, because it bridges the gap between isolation and connection, reminding people that pain is universal and healing is shared. The strength you carry now was born in the very moments you once wished to escape. And when you let others witness both the struggle and the rising, you offer them a vision of what is possible for their own lives. Your story holds the power to break shame, to dismantle silence, to challenge hopelessness, and to plant the seed of courage in someone else's heart. And in that way, your pain is never wasted because it becomes the foundation upon which others stand. So when you rise, you do not rise alone. You rise carrying the countless others who will see your scars and find in them courage to face their own battles. And in that shared rising, your story, once a source of pain, becomes the very reason someone else dares to believe in their own strength. Rising is not about perfection, it's about truth, because the real victory is not found in becoming flawless or meeting every expectation, but in having the courage to own who you are, with all your scars, imperfections, and contradictions, and standing tall in that authenticity. Perfection is a mirage that keeps us endlessly striving yet never arriving, trapping us in comparison and shame, while truth is solid ground that allows us to live freely, even if that truth is messy, complicated, and unfinished. For the act of rising is not about presenting an ideal version of ourselves, but about embracing the reality of our story and saying, "This is me, and I am enough." When we rise, it is not because we have erased all of our mistakes or silenced all of our doubts, but because we have learned to integrate them into the fabric of who we are, seeing them not as blemishes to be hidden, but as proof that we are human, learning, and evolving. The strength to rise comes from owning both our light and our shadows, from refusing to pretend to be smaller, quieter, or more polished than we really are, and from standing in our truth even when it shakes in our voice. The freedom of rising is found not in perfection but in honesty, because honesty creates connection. It builds trust within ourselves and with others, and it releases the exhausting burden of trying to be someone we are not. When we stop chasing perfection, we begin to see that authenticity is where real power lies, and the courage to own our truth is what turns wounds into wisdom and mistakes into lessons. Rising is about saying yes to the whole of yourself, the parts you love, the parts you wish were different, and the parts you are still learning to understand, because only when we embrace ourselves fully can we rise without fear of being exposed. The victory is not in never stumbling, but in refusing to hide when we do, in letting the world see us rise again and again with resilience, vulnerability, and grace. The beauty of truth is that it liberates us. It removes the weight of pretense, and it reminds us that we are worthy not because we are perfect, but because we are real. When you own who you are, you create space for others to do the same, and in that shared authenticity, rising becomes contagious. A movement of people daring to live as their true selves rather than as polished illusions. Rising is about the quiet strength it takes to look in the mirror and accept the reflection without apology, to carry your story without shame, and to walk into the world knowing that your imperfections do not disqualify you, but make you more relatable, more human, and more powerful. The real victory is not the spotless image, but the raw, unfiltered truth of your life, because that truth is what fuels connection, resilience, and courage. And when you rise with that truth, you rise not just for yourself, but as a beacon for others who are weary of chasing perfection and longing to know that they, too, are enough exactly as they are.